Yeah, I really appreciate the kind introduction and the invitation to speak. Like as mentioned, I was here about 2 years ago, and in the interim, I've sat in on a lot of these talks, and it's been great to see the growth of Data Science Dojo, and really excited to be back in the hot seat talking with you guys today. So big thanks to Dua and Raja and Ramin and all the people behind the scenes that put a lot of time and effort into arranging these talks and making them publicly available. I think it's great for us as practitioners and for the community that they bring us together with these free sessions. So again, really appreciate the invitation and the opportunity and the chance to interact with you guys and get to know each other a little bit. So my focus for today is to talk about how to deliver generative AI projects that are impactful and actually add value to the organizations that we work for. And at the moment, there's a ton of hype. There's a lot of competing views. There's a lot of people out there that are trying to make a buck. And I feel very strongly that where we're at as a practice, we need to be very mature and very deliberate in how we frame and execute these projects. And if we get it right, we'll see continued growth in our field. People will continue to invest. We will create value for our stakeholders and shareholders. And individually and as a profession, we'll see, opportunities for continued growth and advancement. But if we get this wrong, if we contribute to the ramping up of the hype cycle, if we let technical sophistication get in the way of empathy and meaningful work in what we do, I don't think that it's an exaggeration to say that we'll contribute to a third AI winter. And in the worst case, it could be a decade before we see the level of interest and investment that we have today. So I think the stakes are pretty high, and that's the foundation of the presentation here. So for myself, great job already in terms of an introduction. I won't belabor it, but I did want to point to my social media. I absolutely love talking about this stuff. So if you want to connect and discuss anything at all, please do reach out. And I did want to focus a little bit as well, just in terms of experience and in where I found my niche and give a point of reference. I've worked in aviation, I've worked in retail, the public sector, financial services, and within each of those industries, I've worked in human resources, marketing, commercial, and without exception, the biggest opportunity that I've seen, in particular for legacy organizations, has been in improving the relationship between the technology function and the business. And when we're talking about traditional analytics, that relationship was certainly important, but now with the huge surge in interest and demand for generative AI that we've seen over the last year, we've got all eyes on us to deliver these projects. Senior executives are being pushed to show meaningful advancements and to be able to say that they're doing AI. So that relationship is more important than ever. And I found that we've been pretty comfortable as a backroom function. We sit behind doors and we. Sorry, Alex, I should be on slide 2. Are you guys seeing another picture of me with my contact information on there? Let me try that again. I'll just go back and share the entire desktop. So can you see the slide now? Get a picture of me? Perfect. There we go. Thank you. I'll minimize this and hopefully it's not distracting for anybody. So yeah, as I was saying, it's just important that we don't abdicate responsibility. Slide 1, edit view. Maybe if I sit like that. How are we now? Full screen? Yeah, I've done the F5 and I've clicked here. I think we might need to
Jeremy, is
press
it
home.
showing on full screen for you?
It is, yep. No, I've only got the one screen. I'm not that sophisticated, Alex.
Jeremy, sorry to put you through the trouble, but can you reshare your screen once more and just share the whole desktop? Maybe then people might be able to see it in full view.
Yep. So sharing desktop one, share full screen. Is that coming through now properly?
Yes, perfect.
Oh,
Thank
okay,
you so
great.
much.
So sorry for the technical trouble. It always happens. Uh, where was I? Backroom function. So it's incumbent on us, I would say, to move from being that backroom function to seeking positions of influence and guiding our stakeholders as we go. And I will say I'm hesitant to click the chat button and open that up. Ramin, if you don't mind hopping in with any immediate comments, otherwise maybe we can hold off on questions to the end. It doesn't seem that we can do both here. So in those roles that I've held in the different companies, I've had different titles and I've worked with different groups. My first job in the field, actually, I was in a group called Decision Support Systems, reporting to capital planning. I'm in business intelligence now. I've been in just intelligence. There's analytics, predictive analytics. And I think we as practitioners love to talk through this stuff and we have a bit of a mental map of who does what. We can say that a data scientist is more sophisticated in statistics than someone who does advanced analytics. Up until a year ago, when we said AI, we generally meant everything above the bar. Now, when we say AI, we generally mean generative AI. And there's tons of different infographics and Venn diagrams out there that tries to articulate who does what, where we play in the sandbox, and how we add value to the data function within an organization. And I think that it's important that we step back from that type of you do this, I do that, and try to, as a grounding statement, really clearly and crispy articulate what our value proposition is. And I would say at the end of the day, what we do, regardless of if we are data analysts working in Power BI, providing reporting, or a machine learning engineer, fine-tuning a complex model, or someone working on a generative AI project, at the end of the day, we help our stakeholders in an organization to make decisions. If we don't help them make quicker decisions, more accurate decisions, we can't say that we added value. If we put a model out there that doesn't make it into production and doesn't impact operations, we haven't made an impact. And if we create a report that no one's using, again, we haven't made an impact. So at the end of the day, we need to have that grounding statement, that understanding of how it is that we add value to the organizations that we work in. And I think if we can accept that that's what we do at the end of the day, we also need to be honest that we haven't been overwhelmingly successful over time. There's all sorts of studies out there. The one I rely on is from Deloitte. And what they did was surveyed executives in North American organizations, asking them basically, what is advanced analytics, predictive analytics, AI? What's it going to do for you? And half of those organizations said that it was going to fundamentally change the way that they operate in the next 1 to 3 years. On the same hand, we have not been successful in delivering against those expectations. I think most people have heard the 85% of projects end in failure statistic from Gartner. A lot of people argue against that. They say that there's value in learnings, there's value in the POCs, and when things have failed, it's often been stakeholders' fault. But at the end of the day, again, if we haven't helped people make quicker, more accurate decisions, then we can't say that we've been successful. We can't say that we have contributed to the organization. studies from Tech Republic, Capgemini, Fast Company. There's dozens of them out there that talk about the way that these initiatives fall down. And for the most part, the technology does what it's supposed to. We might ask for our ERP providers to make some changes. We might, uh, try to make accommodations based on the culture or the operations of the organizations we're in. But very rarely is it a technical problem. And in my experience, I have seen 99.9% of projects fall down because we haven't taken into account strategy, process, and people. We hyper focus on the technology and we ignore these foundational capabilities. And these are the things that are required for us to interface effectively with the business and to be able to create that value. So if you accept that as the backdrop that we've been working within as data professionals, now in the last year, we've been uh, tasked with providing meaning and executing projects of using generative AI. Any graph you look at around interest in the field is basically a hockey stick curve. It's come out of nowhere in the last year, quickest adoption of a new technology in human history. Super exciting time, and a lot of players entered almost instantaneously. So it's a very fragmented ecosystem, and there's a lot of confusion out there from stakeholders. But one of the most interesting things I find is that for really the first time in my career, it's not us that's knocking on doors and articulating a value proposition and telling people what's possible. Executives, businesses, they're being pressured by their board, they're being pressured by investors to be able to say that they're, again, doing AI. And there was a great study by Wall Street Zen that's well worth digging into if you're interested in the topic. And what they did was they looked at earnings transcripts from publicly traded companies in North America for the first half of 2023. And what they found is that the more that AI was mentioned, the more likely their stock price was to rise in the following 3 days. And then they break that out by the actual company. So a lot of them make perfect sense. NVIDIA, they mentioned AI 150 times in their 1 hour phone call, and the street rewarded them with a 25% bump in the share price. But as you dig in, there's a lot in there that will raise your eyebrow a little bit. Sherwin-Williams, paint and home improvement company, they mention AI 66 times, so about once a minute in a phone call. And as you go further into that list, there's some that quite out there. Lamb Weston, I believe the biggest French fry manufacturer in the US, they mention AI 104 times. Hershey's, the chocolate bar company, 88 times. So I think you can say with some confidence that if a chocolate bar and French fry company is saying AI every 30 seconds, that you're at a peak of inflated expectations. McKinsey says that this is a potentially $3 trillion market. That may be so, but most of that value is going to be realized by NVIDIA, by Alphabet, by Microsoft. It's not going to be the chocolate bar and French fry companies. So we're at that point where executives, again, they don't understand it. They're pressing for it. They're saying we need this, and they're turning to us for guidance and support on this. And that's why I think it's so important that we are judicious in how we help our organizations with this. And against that, we're also seeing slowing growth in adoption and in active users for all of this. So a lot of other studies out there on this as well. We saw huge growth with all the popularity and media coverage for ChatGPT. But over the last few months, that growth has been slowing. There's still more users all the time. There's a lot more competition in terms of models out there, but even the active usership and the time spent on the platform is starting to decrease. So people have come in, they've asked it to write them some copy or a poem, and they've got their chuckles. They don't know how to integrate it into their daily life, and they've moved on. So we're seeing a drop in that. And Sequoia Capital did a similar study looking at retention rates and active users And again, those AI first companies are not nearly as sticky as the incumbents. So we're probably past that peak of interest, and it's more important than ever that we are the voice of reason in these boardrooms when we start to talk about what the possibilities are. So that's the current state as I see it. One is it's obviously an area of immense potential. There's undeniable benefit with generative AI, immediate productivity improvements, amazing tool for synthesizing information. And I think that all of us as practitioners really want to realize the maximum benefit of that technology over the long term. But on the demand side, we have really unrealistic expectations. Executives and the people that are clamoring for it, they really don't understand the limitations. They don't understand the landscape. And the public perception is alternating very quickly between anxiety and fear and then exuberance and excitement about the future with investors that are demanding immediate lift. And then when we sit around that table, when we're doing these ideation sessions, when we're talking about low-hanging fruit and immediate productivity gains, person beside us is talking about using AI to revolutionize French fries and chocolate bars. That's very exciting on the surface. And again, we as practitioners need to really manage executive and public perception. And I think that that's complicated finally by the fact that most practitioners got into this because we love the technology, and that has led us to want to pursue the most advanced use cases. And most of us have the aspirations to do a lot more than an API call. We want to be out there fine tuning, we want to be building our own models, and we enjoy the technology quite often at the expense of our stakeholders. We like the technology, not so much what it can do. So we, again, as practitioners, need to keep our stakeholders top of mind and our customers and reorient ourselves and remind ourselves again that the value we create is when we help people in our world make quicker and more accurate decisions. So for the rest of the talk, I just wanted to split it out into really three takeaways. And I think the first and the most important is to separate what's cool from what's valuable. And we're quite guilty of that. I am myself. It's easy to get myopic based on our professions and get excited about playing with the technology and not sitting with the use case and really interrogating it and seeing if it makes sense. Everybody's familiar, I think, with the Gartner hype cycle. It says that the life cycle of really every technology is that it hits that peak of inflated expectations before people become disillusioned. If you look at it for last year, generative AI at the absolute peak. So very clear from their perspective that we're reaching a point of disillusionment. And I'm quite fortunate that people reach out to me on social media with ideas about applications for it to get my impression. And I enjoy that certainly, but I find a lot of people again are trying to make a buck on this, and they are not really sitting with that use case and not asking themselves, as a user, is this something that adds value? Is this something that is a worthwhile pursuit? Is there a competitive moat here? A couple of the use cases I've got up there: life coach, parenting advice. Like, can you imagine Chat GPT giving you parenting advice? I think that's on the surface immediately discreditable. And even the way that it's trained, one of the other use cases people have proposed is recommending a neighborhood in a new city. So the idea is you would go to the OpenAI marketplace and you would say, I'm moving to the city. Which neighborhood should I go to? And the way that those are trained, of course, is they take all of that media publications, and it talks about gentrifying cities or areas, talks about up and coming neighborhoods. Without exception, if you try this out, it tells you that the most dangerous area in your city is the recommended one, just because of the phrasing of all of the media reports on it. So all of these really are dangerous. They're hyper personalized, and if you sit with them, I think able to be immediately discredited. And because they're just a thin application layer, they're essentially an API call. There's again no competitive moat. there's nothing you can do to stop someone else from coming in behind you and building that same API. There's no underlying value in it. And it puts work and effort into something that, again, contributes to that hype. So we always need to be looking for projects that add immediate value, that contribute to the bottom line of the company. And if you look at technically mature companies, they seem to be the ones that have this figured out. Gartner did a study on this, and the technically mature companies are the ones that are pursuing those commercial off-the-shelf products. They're looking at opportunities that improve customer experience, easy productivity gains and cost efficiency. And then it's the less mature ones, it's the French fry and chocolate bar companies that are trying to reorient their companies around this technology that's only been in the public eye for about a year. So very dangerous, very risky pivot from a corporate perspective. And again, like I've got mentioned on the left here, immediate, easy gains in terms of synthesizing information, in terms of developing low value copy. There's so much we can do from day one that we don't need to completely upend our organizations to do something that's cool but not valuable. And that's important, I think, because the cool factor fades quite quickly. And I've again got a lot of these recommendations over time. And if we don't assess them in terms of risk and the need for a human touch and being a defensible moat, we can really quickly go down a path where we don't have anybody over our shoulder. We don't have a coalition behind us. And we've confused the cool and the valuable, and we end up with all this time invested in something that really doesn't support the mandate of our organizations. Uh, Next best vehicle I find is a really interesting one. That was another one because I work in automotive retail at the moment. Someone had suggested, again, it was a OpenAI marketplace. You pay $2 and you tell this API call to ChatGPT, I drive vehicle A and vehicle B. What vehicle should I look at next? And in North America, at least, buying a vehicle is an emotional, aspirational, multi-year journey. You watch YouTube videos, you aspire to this certain vehicle, you talk with your friends about what color you're going to get and what features. Years later, when you've got the money saved up, you finally test drive it and you pull the trigger. To give away that almost beautiful, freedom inspiring experience that is really human focused over to a chatbot, nobody would do that in North America. It's uh, something that is on the surface, at least to a North American market, almost nonsensical. And we need to sit with these ideas before we begin to invest in them. So just to put it together, the commercial application of any of these projects really needs to align to business metrics. And if they don't, it's not going to stand up to scrutiny among executive stakeholders. And we always need to be focused on value. And the other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is how important people are to the equation. And again, we being technology practitioners, we often over focus on that, but I think we need to look at the potential risks from a regulatory perspective as well as a PR perspective. Because again, as the public alternates between excitement and anxiety about this, if we reorient our organizations and say we're an AI first company, the winds could change and we could find ourselves hung out to dry, as it were. So we really, again, need to be cautious about how we're presenting ourselves from a branding perspective. And I think to hammer that home, something that's quite interesting is the difference in the way that we perceive the reasons for and against AI winters that have happened over time. And if you look at any literature from a practitioner perspective, it will be very different from a social scientist perspective. If you look at the AI winter that happened in the late 70s, early 80s, any technical literature will say, well, because of advancements in backpropagation and neural nets, We got out of that AI winter, and investment and research came back. But if you look at what was happening culturally at the time, science fiction became cool again. People were very future oriented. We had Blade Runner, Aliens, Star Wars. It's a time of excitement and enthusiasm, a little bit of fear. At the time, it was the peak of the Cold War, and Ronald Reagan was talking about satellites in space that were going to shoot nuclear missiles with lasers. It was a scary and exciting time. And it's that cultural zeitgeist shift that leads to interest and investment and research. It's not back propagation. Certainly that enables what came after, but it's the culture and the people and the media. And at this core, it is people at the end of the day that need to be the consumers of these products. And the same thing happened in the 90s, which is more to my time. If you look at the technical literature, it will say, well, the cost per computation came down adequately. It would say that there were advancements in machine learning, and we came out of that second AI winter. But at the same time, if you recall in the late 90s, everybody had a Tamagotchi. AI had just won at chess. There was Furby and Roomba. Again, it was a time of excitement, enthusiasm for the future, and investments in space and science fiction. So again, it's that shift in culture that leads to changes in interest and investment and research. It's not the technology. The technology is certainly necessary, but it's not a sufficient condition. And with that being the case, it's when we have these opportunities in front of us, we have to move away from, is this something we can do, to, is this something we should do? And instead of looking at it solely from a technical perspective, what technology stack should we do? Do we have the data for this? And jumping straight into technical solutioning, we really need to involve other people in our organizations. We need to involve our communications team, our HR team. We need to involve operations, and we need to involve legal, certainly, and go through some bigger, more corporate perspective questions on this stuff. In terms of accountability, who's going to decide if something is an appropriate use, and does this translate across all of our geographies and potential cultural shifts? Does this expose us in the future? If we have vicarious exposure with one of the vendors that we're working with, if we tie our wagon to ChatGPT and OpenAI their stock is in decline with the public, is that something that we're willing to take on as a risk? In the EU, how are we going to deal with right to be forgotten requests? That there's all of these questions that we need to ask in advance of going down the path of a lot of these projects. Ethically and in terms of public relations, again, the winds could change very quickly. And with the political environment in the US and in Canada, if one of the political parties decided that they were against artificial intelligence because it was, say, dehumanizing, or say it was unfair to workers and it was going to take jobs, or they could say it was unfair to the creative classes and it represents IP theft. All of a sudden, again, if you say we're an AI first company and 50% of the population of the US is now against that, that's a very hard thing to turn back in terms of a PR gaffe. So we need to ask all these questions again before we start talking about technical solutioning and what stack we're going to use. So most of my practice is focused in Canada. That's what I'm most familiar with from a regulatory perspective. But in Canada, at least, and for a good number of other jurisdictions, we don't know what the end state of all this regulation is going to look like. In Canada, we have something called Bill C-27 that's been in our House for the past several years with a companion document called the AIDA. And essentially what it says is that at some point when this law passes, there's going to be an AI minister, and this person is going to monitor companies for compliance, and they're going to order audits. It doesn't say anything about what compliance looks like. It doesn't say anything about what those audits are going to look like. but it does say that there's going to be criminal prohibitions and potentially prosecutions for the reckless use of AI. And again, it doesn't define what reckless use is. And then it also leaves it open to provincial supplementation. So it may end up in Canada, at least, that we have a patchwork across the entire country of what you're allowed to do in Eastern Canada versus Central Canada versus BC versus the territories. It could end up in a place where it's so onerous that you need to manage all of these competing models, and it just doesn't make sense. And we don't know exactly what the structure of that is going to look like. Again, none of these have been very clearly articulated, so we don't know what the end state is going to be. But we can kind of get a sense of what our federal government's techno-emotional posture is, looking at their internal usage guide. So they have something called the Guide on the Use of Generative AI, and it's about I recall a 20-page document, I think, and one page in the middle of that 20 pages says the usual things. Don't input sensitive information. Don't use this for decisions. It's only for ideation. The first 10 pages and the last 10 pages are a lot of warnings that this is going to erode the capabilities of public servants, that it's a source of greenhouse gas emissions, it's racist, it's full of bias. So you really get a sense of what the government thinks of generative AI, and that posture is likely to influence the final form of this bill C-27 when it comes out. So for a lot of organizations that I've talked to about this, that they haven't even thought about this. They're not very concerned. And it's like building a skyscraper in a jurisdiction where there's no building codes. And you know, a few years down the road, they're going to have those building codes and they're going to come and tell you what they are. And if you haven't complied with them retroactively, you're going to be in trouble up to and including criminal prosecution. So it's a very scary thing. And anytime we're planting our flag in this, we should be as conservative as possible to make sure that however these laws land at the end of the day, we're on side. Because if again they decide that we're not allowed to do certain things and we're outside the bounds of the law, it's going to be a lot harder to pull that back and uh, kill whatever features we have in tooling that's based on this. The United States is a lot more clear, but they still run the risk of a patchwork among the different states because they have supplementation at the state level, but they also have that voluntary compliance, so there's a little bit more guidance. European Union is different. Just recently, I think as much as little as a month ago, they gave a lot more guidance, so it's quite restrictive and limiting, I would say, but at least there's transparency. At least you know what you're dealing with, and there's less risk in an environment like that. You know, I started working on this slide probably a little over a month ago, and it's just filled up since then. Because this is changing so quickly, I've had to slide in bullets a long time to make it relevant, and that's how quickly the regulatory environment is moving, and that's why we need to be so up to date on this because we are really the sole educated advisor in our organization. So we need to be up to date on this stuff. And The Economist did a great article on this, on the potential international regulatory environments and the different companies that are advocating for different forms of it. Microsoft, for example, is advocating for something similar to the International Civil Aviation Organization, and they believe that if there are standards for voluntary adoption, that naturally people will adopt those so that they can work across geographic regions. And it's nice, it's idealistic. Open source, of course, is pushing for something more like CERN, where you know, people's good intentions will encourage them to sort of share their research with each other, and that's probably idealistic, but a nice output. OpenAI, of course, is pursuing a business moat by legislation, and they're encouraging something similar to the IAEA, where a supernatural body like the UN has international authority to ensure compliance. So again, we don't know even internationally how this is going to end up, and that affects which use cases we can pursue. So for our part, within our organizations, a lot of clients that I've been working with have said that they're apprehensive about putting out an acceptable use policy because they have concerns that if they do that, it's the tacit acknowledgement and acceptance that their staff is using Gen AI. And they would kind of rather, hide their eyes, let them do it, but say it's not sanctioned. If you do it, it's at your own risk. Uh, Without a doubt, any organization of size has several people that are already doing it. And again, we as practitioners need to be involved in educating and influencing our organizations on this. Any organization needs an acceptable use policy on this, and it doesn't need to be onerous. It doesn't need to be a big to-do with the steering committee. Andrew Ng has a great video on this, Opportunities in AI. Highly recommend folks watching it. It only needs to be simple. Turn off the history, don't enter any sensitive information, and use it for synthesis, not decision making. So if you cover those three things, for the most part, that's enough to get people thinking and to cover your bases. And then I've talked a little bit about having a coalition behind you and how often practitioners get stuck in professional myopia. Great comic on the right there, and it's very grounded in truth. I've talked to a couple people who they've just finished up their end of year evaluations. I'm sure anybody with this working for medium or large companies, at the end of the year, you talk about the things you learned, the things that you want to do next year, how you're going to contribute to the success of the company. And I would say for the most part, we as practitioners, we're not English majors. We're not great at the flowery prose. But if we want to be seen as up and coming, we really need to write like 3 flowery pages. We want to put our heart in. So we, plug in 5 or 6 bullets and it gives us those 3 flowery pages. We plug them in. On the other side of that, our managers certainly don't have time to read that. So they get your bullets back. They put it back in a chat GPT. So when you look at that transaction, certainly both sides of it got exactly what they wanted, but it's only masking what was a cultural issue. And if you zoom out in the slightest amount, you can see how silly it is end to end. And that's why we need trusted peers in this, because when we get myopic, when we look at our own use cases and what we're working on, we can very quickly lose track of the bigger picture. So all that to say, we at a minimum need a trusted partner, someone that we can talk through these ideas with. But it's always better to have more people at the table and cross representation from different functions in the business. So again, such a fluid environment, we really need to be taking a human-centric approach to all this to avoid reputational damage. And that's for our organizations, that's for us, but that's also for the practice as a whole. We really need to, again, be judicious in how we do this. And again, recall that generative AI is there to help people. It's not a technology that gets implemented in absence of operations or other functions in our business. It's there to help people and to help stakeholders make quicker, more effective decisions. And we need to see it through that lens. And then the last one is just around project management. And I don't think there's anything revolutionary in here, but it's something, again, that we need to keep in mind is that there's so many low-hanging fruit out there. And I see we've got 20 minutes left, so I'll definitely save 10, 15 for questions. There's so much easy stuff out there. There's so much low-hanging fruit. And again, we as practitioners, I think, really want to sink our teeth into those big, hairy, audacious projects. But those are highly risky. They're going to be multi-year projects, and there's a lot of risk around changes in legislation, underlying LLMs and technologies. We can also run into a problem where if we don't have that foundation of credibility, if executives in our organizations don't have any proof of value of this, we're going to find before the 2-year project is delivered, we've gone through budget cuts, we've gone through all sorts of audits. People have lost interest, they've moved on to the new shiny thing. We need to start again with those low-hanging fruit, build credibility, and get people excited about what it can actually do. not what they've read on Business Insider that it can do. And this isn't endorsement of these tools. It's just an example of some that I'm familiar with and things that any organization can basically do today. Social media teams using Jasper, Copy AI, vastly improve productivity. As long as you have someone overseeing the output on these, you can reduce a lot of the variable expenses in marketing teams just through adopting these tools. GitHub Copilot is another one. There's a bit of a learning curve associated with it, but again, huge benefit to development productivity. Even in HR, I've seen some success with Textio, helping with job descriptions, helping with uh, analysis and recommendations. There's a ton of tools out there that have been purpose-built. Very inexpensive, very easy way to prove the value of generative AI. So I'll skip that just in the interest of time and end here. There's a great study by McKinsey, and they introduce something that I speak about quite often, the concept of takers, shapers, and makers, which rolls off the tongue and I think is very illustrative of what the issue is. And what McKinsey says is that takers use APIs. They take an API to ChatGPT, any other LLM, or they use it directly. They use off-the-shelf products. And from their perspective, 90% of use cases should be that. Of the remaining 10%, 90% of those will be shapers. Those are the ones that are fine-tuning existing models. They have a narrow enough use case that there's benefit in the additional effort to fine-tune a model. And then that remaining 1% are the ones that are going to be building their own foundational models. But what we see among practitioners is the interest is basically the inverse of that. We all want to be the shapers and the makers, and it hurts our egos a little bit to recommend those off-the-shelf products. But I think if we're honest with ourselves, most of our organizations have issues reconciling financial statements. We don't have data governance in place. We're being run with Excel. We have all of these issues that are making it difficult for us even to do BI effectively. And we likely don't have the technical maturity to be building our own foundational models. And that same study by McKinsey found that 72% of organizations are already challenged scaling their AI use cases before we even start talking about the complexity of generative AI. So we really need to be honest with ourselves. And as we are doing those easy wins, that low-hanging fruit, again, double down on getting our house in order, get our data governance in place, get all of our PII masking, get all of our metadata management, get everything we need in place. And then in the future, as the regulatory environment lands where it's going to land, then we're well set to be able to advance in our sophistication here. So to put that all together again, we need to get our houses in order. We need to focus on delivery models and healthy data. And in the meantime, focusing on those low-hanging fruit. So just about on time, and just to put it together again, we are at a point of irrational exuberance, and it's up to us as practitioners, as professionals in this space to really manage expectations. We need to be choosing projects that have a clear value proposition, and we need to be the voice of reason at the table. When people are trying to make AI-enabled paint, French fries, chocolate bars, we need to be the voice of reason. Tell them what generative AI can really do. Help them understand the risks and the regulatory environment and be very conservative in our use cases until public perception and regulations are making themselves clear. And to get our houses in order, and until we're at the point where we can really be effective at these sophisticated use cases and fine-tuning our own models, to start with the easy stuff and use these off-the-shelf products.